Ukraine's people have been through a struggle few of us can imagine. Tens of thousands killed, homes and communities left in ruins.
Где жить? Как жить? Это же страшно.
All because of the will of one man. Putin was the pariah for years, but Trump changed all that in just a few days.
President Putin wants peace, and President Zelenskyy wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed.
He brought Putin back to the table and made Europe question its security in a way it hasn't for decades.
The UK is prepared to back this, with boots on the ground and planes in the air.
Alliances which once seemed unshakable, now facing an existential crisis.
You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
The President-elect of the United States, the Honorable Donald John Trump.
Donald Trump wants to turn inward, he wants to save money, he wants America first.
The golden age of America begins right now.
Frankly, the rest of the world comes second.
From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
When President Trump was first elected, I think there was probably a sense of anticipation, a sense of trepidation, and also excitement about his return to the White House, partly because of the sense of stasis that there had been in the final months of Joe Biden's presidency.
From a Beijing point of view, there is not much difference these days between a Democratic president and a Republican president. The hawkish view that China is the greatest threat to American national security and economic growth has become one of the few bipartisan issues in US politics.
We always knew that Donald Trump was going to try and end the war. Initially, he said he was going to do it on the first day. He later changed that to the first 100 days. But no one, I think, quite predicted how hardline he would get with Ukraine.
President Trump calls Putin and Zelenskyy, saying negotiations to end the conflict should begin immediately.
I'll be dealing with President Putin largely on the phone, and we ultimately expect to meet. In fact, we expect that he'll come here and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia. The first time we'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done. But we want to end that war. That war is a disaster.
Normally, a leader of a country like the United States would be the very last step in a long diplomatic process, building up to a phone call like that, especially with a country which is an adversary for which there are multiple sanctions imposed by the US. So the idea that it would happen so quickly without any kind of input from any of his key cabinet apparently was frankly astonishing. And for it to go on for 90 minutes was really remarkable.
The new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, had turned up at a NATO meeting and announced that effectively they were pulling the rug from under Ukraine.
You have to spend more on your defense, for your country, on that continent, understanding that the American military and the American people stand beside you as we have in NATO, but can't have the expectation of being the permanent guarantor, as I alluded to, from what even Eisenhower observed post-World War II. That shift has to happen. The peace dividend has to end. President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker.
And then the next day, J.D. Vance turns up, supposed to be talking about Ukraine at a security conference, and lectures the whole of Europe about its political institutions and about its attitude to free speech, and this suggestion that the greatest threat to Europe came from within, not from Russia.
The speech by J.D. Vance in Munich was a thunderbolt through the international community.
While the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
It really illustrated that every fear there had been about Trump and the Trump administration's attitude to Europe was not only going to be realized, but was potentially going to be even worse than people had feared.
The U.S. Vice President made it clear. He said, decades of the old relationship between Europe and America are ending. From now on, things will be different, and Europe needs to adjust to that.
The idea that J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, would stand up and so pointedly criticise his very own allies in NATO was really remarkable, really shocking, and I think it totally blindsided a lot of his European leaders.
Next to take the stage was China's foreign minister and most senior diplomat Wang Yi. He entered to a room left stunned by what the Vice President of the United States had to say. The audience was maybe looking for some reassurance, and that's what Wang Yi delivered on behalf of Xi Jinping. China has been trying to sell this narrative of Xi as the strong, stable, responsible global power. And in contrast to J.D. Vance, that looked more believable than ever. Wang Yi's speech about multilateralism, paying attention to the little guy, was, if not lapped up, it came as a welcome contrast to what was heard by the US Vice President. J.D. Vance had helped China to sell its vision that it is the more reliable global partner for Europe, not the United States.
We're, of course, happy to welcome the Ukrainian delegation led by...
I think that is the moment that we will look back on as the time that everything changed in that relationship between the US and Europe.
Well, there is a school of thought that says something needed to change, and Trump has changed it.
Russia's in from the cold, meeting with America as Ukraine is frozen out.
When it was announced that there were going to be peace talks in Saudi Arabia between representatives of Russia and the United States, but excluding Ukraine, there was shock not just here in Kyiv and around the country, but also in other Western capitals who were genuinely wrong-footed by the fact that all of a sudden the United States was taking this driving role, and it was doing so without Ukraine at the table.
I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president.
I don't think anyone quite realised what a pro-Russian position Donald Trump would take right from the beginning, aligning himself very much with Moscow.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way.
With all due respect to President Donald Trump as a leader, he is living in this disinformation space.
A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast, because that war is going in the wrong direction. In the meantime, we're successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia.
When you put together the different comments that have come out of the American administration over the past weeks, it tells you everything you need to know about the pivot in the relationship between the US and Russia. There must be absolute glee in the Kremlin at what's going on. They are watching the fragmentation of Europe and the American alliance. They are watching the panic across European nations and other Western nations about where they go from here.
Putin has been brought back from pariah status to sitting at the table of the United States as back to the old days of the two superpowers carving up the world. he cannot believe his luck. Not a single demand has been made on him in terms of what's going to be required for a ceasefire or for a Trump-dictated peace. All the pressure has been on President Zelenskyy.
People in Ukraine will be really worried about the direction all this is heading in. They have seen repeatedly Vladimir Putin taking bits of Ukraine, breaking promises, breaking ceasefire agreements, and repeatedly coming back for more of their territory, repeatedly trying to kill their citizens.
What we're seeing here is the true face of this Russian invasion. President Putin doesn't seem to care whether civilians are caught by his shells and rockets. He's not liberating this country, he's destroying it.
What's been really incredible to witness is the fortitude of the Ukrainian people fighting back, initially with very little resources, and holding back the Russians.
Где жить? Как жить? Это же страшно.
I've covered the war in Ukraine since 2014, and over those years I've spoken with many Ukrainians about how they feel about the situation, and there is no doubt that they have been worn down by this war. So many people have left, so many people have been displaced, and so many people have lost relations and friends.
I also vividly remember the atrocities that were perpetrated by Russian troops in places like Bucha. Unspeakable horrors that we saw there of entire families who were killed, who were shot, mass graves that the Ukrainians had discovered, women being attacked and raped in their own homes, children being killed. So, you know, it's very easy when we talk about the diplomacy of all this for things like Bucha to get forgotten.
What's really struck me is the sense of betrayal and anger, the sense that what on earth is going on here? How can we just be left to the phrase of politics? How is it that countries are determining what happens here? Countries that don't have any direct involvement.
But security in Europe is more threatened than it has been since the Second World War. And I don't think that when Keir Starmer came into government, he realised perhaps the extent to which things would change. There is a strong feeling inside Downing Street here that we need the US, and particularly we need the US when it comes to Ukraine. His announcement on international aid was hugely influenced by Donald Trump.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
It was absolutely put together in order to be ready for that meeting with Donald Trump.
It's a great honour to have Prime Minister Starmer in the Oval Office.
I spoke to someone in Downing Street soon after the meeting went ahead and said to them, like, how much effort did you put into that meeting? And they were like, so much. They almost thought it was too much. They almost thought, do we really need to put all this effort into that one meeting? They said it had begun long before the meeting itself had even been announced. And what they did was they got loads of experts into Downing Street, people who had dealt with Donald Trump in his first administration, who had watched him closely, who had examined the way that he responded to things. And they went over and over and over again. How is it that you actually get the best out of Donald Trump?
This is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented.
But there were two things in particular they were particularly pleased to get out of that meeting, or they thought they had got out. One was that there was a commitment to Article 5, which is the idea that if one NATO country is attacked, then it's as if we've all been attacked. The other was they felt, and it looks like maybe wrongly so, that there was a hint that there would be security guarantees for Ukraine if the UK and other countries in Europe provided peacekeeping forces. It all went so smoothly for Keir Starmer, and then 24 hours later, very different scenes in the White House.
President Trump, do you have a message for Vladimir Putin as you meet with...
Those scenes in the Oval Office caused absolute horror here in Ukraine.
I've never seen anything like it.
It was absolute shock from the people I spoke to. They were gathered around TVs, they were open-mouthed.
First of all, during the war, Everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards.
Playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
It was just unbelievable watching a stand-up row. It was like a school ground bully having a go at a small kid in the class, you know, lecturing him in front of everyone else, in front of the world's media, in the most undignified, undiplomatic way.
People felt that this was an ambush for President Zelenskyy. They may have hoped that he'd handled it slightly better, but they watched and listened to what was going on there and knew that this was a very, very significant moment and potentially a very dark moment for this country. And so it may prove to be.
Keir Starmer was very clear in his support for Volodymyr Zelenskyy when he had a defence summit here 2 days later, coming out into the streets, you know, putting his arm around him, saying, look at these supporters who have come here to meet you. It gives him an opportunity to take a statesman-like position and to try and reach in both directions on this. He definitely sees his role as a kind of problem solver, as someone who international rules, the international community is incredibly important too. This suits his skills.
We've agreed that the UK, France and others will work with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting. We will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. This effort must have strong US backing.
In terms of how Trump has shaken up European security, I mean, it's absolutely put a firecracker under European leaders in terms of what they need to do. And what they're doing is very, very big potatoes indeed.
EU leaders back a massive increase in defence spending, ready for a new world order. As they welcome President Zelenskyy this morning, a critical juncture.
This is a watershed moment for Europe. And Ukraine, as part of our European family, it's also a watershed moment for Ukraine. Europe faces a clear and present danger.
You made a strong signal to Ukrainian people, to Ukrainian warriors, to civilians, to all our families. And it's great that we are not alone. We feel it and we know it.
We're talking sums of money that could stretch into the trillions. Europe has moved very, very fast in a very, very fast changing situation. And the sums of money we're talking about are very, very significant and will have a huge impact on Europe's defence capabilities.
This is a new moment in history. This is the moment that America steps away from Europe. This is the moment when Europe has to step out on its own.
I think that European leaders believe there may be a way through this, but for years to come now, our politics is going to be completely dominated by international security, by defence, by the rise of the strong man.
For the next 3 years, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping will be the protagonists on the world stage, if not carving up the world as they see fit, certainly exerting their power and influence. President Xi Jinping talks to Vladimir Putin more than any other world leader, and the pair meet at least 3 times a year. Xi is planning to visit Moscow to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in May. Perhaps Xi Jinping and Putin will be celebrating the end of post-World War II global order as well.
We haven't seen a moment like this since the end of the Second World War, really, when the world was essentially carved up between the great nations. Suddenly we're in a world where We just don't know what Europe is going to look like in a couple of decades' time, whether NATO will exist in a couple of decades' time, the effect on Ukraine, on the Middle East, and what place America plays in the world.
I think European and NATO leaders may well have been caught out quite badly by President Trump. I think they did underestimate what he was going to do. They knew that he was going to be a force for change. They knew that things would not stay the same, but I don't think anybody expected it to happen this quickly and this dramatically.
The whole concept of the West may be under threat in the course of the next 4 years. America's allies are really going to struggle to trust Donald Trump and his administration if the early weeks of this new administration prove to be a pattern going forward. Now, this may just be an early dose of shock and awe, shake everything up, break everything down, and relations will become saner, for want of a better word, from some point onwards. But if not, then Europe is going to find Trump extremely difficult to deal with, largely because it is so unpredictable. At no point do they know what he's going to do, who he's going to do it to, or how he's going to react.
This is a fundamental shift in American foreign policy, and I think Europe has been caught napping, and I think other parts of the Western world have been caught in exactly the same position, and now they are desperately trying to catch up. President Trump is well ahead at this point.